What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Bootleg Football Podcast. We got a huge show for you this week. We are going over every single new coaching staff in the NFL, all 7 of the major head coaching changes and their coordinator picks. We have a huge trade in the NFL to talk about. We'll get to that at the top of the show. Just a jam-packed show for you this week. Before we get into everything, though, my co-host, my friend EJ, buddy, how you doing? And what are you drinking tonight?
I'm doing all right, which kind of leads into what I'm drinking tonight. I can't top your dental exploits of the week, but I do have a tooth that's pissing me off. And so I'm on antibiotics to try and calm that down. And, of course, one of the things about antibiotics is no drinking booze. So I just have orange seltzer tonight. What do you have? Because you had way more done than I had done.
Yeah, I also am booze-free for the night because I've been popping ibuprofens all day because, believe it or not, I just had a wisdom tooth removed a couple days ago. I know a lot of people are like, wisdom teeth? You're almost 30 and you're getting your wisdom teeth out now? Yes. Why is that? Because I only grew wisdom teeth on my top row of teeth. I never actually grew bottom wisdom teeth, so I never really needed them removed until now, when I went in for a cleaning and the dentist says, hey, these are growing sideways. You should probably get those taken care of. And I said, shit, okay, schedule me. So I waited till after the season because I have, it's a multi-appointment thing, and each appointment takes like 3.5 hours, and I get all nice and drugged up with Novocaine. I had like 7 or 8 shots of Novocaine because apparently that doesn't work on me too well, so I needed a ton of it. So yeah, I've been taking ibuprofen to deal with some nagging jaw pain all week. So no booze for me tonight either. I think it's our first dry bootleg show, now that I think about it.
Between the two of us, yeah, I think we're usually one of us is holding up the other end of the wagon, but no. We'll get through it regardless. And, tons of good stuff, as you said, to talk about. We didn't have the trade, but as is typical with writing up bootleg agendas, we just have to write one, and then something fun happens in the NFL, and it certainly happened today.
Yeah, so Carson Wentz is the newest, presumably starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. This has been a wild saga that I know you as a Bears fan, you've been paying very close attention to for the last, 3-4 weeks now. All told, the Eagles are getting a 2021 third rounder and a conditional 2022 second that can become a 2022 first-round pick if Wentz plays at least 75% of the snaps next year, or if he plays 70% of the snaps and they go to the playoffs, which isn't out of the realm of possibility. It's one of the stronger rosters in the AFC, so I think either way, that's a pretty good bet for Philly to get a first-round pick out of him. Ironically enough, the Eagles gave up 5 picks in the first place to get Wentz back in the 2016 draft, including a couple first-rounders. They paid him $128 million less than 2 years ago, and now they are offloading him with a record dead cap hit of $33.8 million. Never happened before in NFL history. Weirdly enough, the previous record for dead cap hits, by the way, was the Rams with Jared Goff last week at, 20-something million. So that 2016 quarterback class is representing well, or I guess you can call it representing terribly in terms of sunk cost fallacies. But so yeah, the Eagles put 5 picks in to get Wentz, paid him a bunch of money, and less than 2 years later, trading him away. What they do from here on out is anyone's guess, whether they stick with Jalen Hurts, whether they try to go after either Fields or Zach Wilson maybe from BYU. I don't know if they're going to be able to, because I think a lot of other teams are going to be able to snipe those quarterbacks ahead of them. But either way, I'm fascinated to see what the 2021 Eagles do heading into probably a soft rebuilding year. And then 2022, I think, is their target because they're presumably going to have 2 first-round picks, a bunch of cap space opened up after the Carson Wentz deal comes off their books after next year. So I think 2022 is the target here, and I think one of the bigger topics of this offseason is how Philly sets themselves up for a big rebound 2 seasons from now.
Yeah, the Bears are not in an unfamiliar or unsimilar position or dissimilar position to the Eagles in terms of they're probably not going to do anything this year, save some kind of miracle at quarterback. So it's a similar situation I'm not unfamiliar with. One of the things about the Carson Wentz trade that's just super odd, Field Yates put it on Twitter today. It says, and with the trade of Carson Wentz, there will now not be a single quarterback drafted in the first round from 2009 to 2016 that is still with his original team. 0 out of 22
wild.
total. That's 22 quarterbacks drafted in the first round between '09 and 16, and none of them, 0, are still with their first team. So when we say it's a crapshoot, folks, we mean it. The draft is a crapshoot. That's an amazing stat. And I put out a little poll on Twitter to follow that up and said, so the Eagles are likely to dump some resources. Speaking of the Eagles and what their 2021 really looks like, I think they're likely to dump some resources into acquiring a starting QB, either through a trade, Watson if they can pull it off, but I don't know that that's true, or through the draft. And that means they're probably going to have to move up from 6, like it or not, because I think most folks will know by then whether or not they're going to do it, and anybody that wants one of the top 3 is going to move up. Carolina, Denver, San Francisco could all jump up and pip Philly. So if they do that, they're probably going to have to spend some of those draft picks and move up to get one of the top 3 if they want them. And I said, if they do that, if they do either thing, a trade or move up in the draft and get, essentially a first-round quarterback, do they keep Jalen Hurts? And the results were pretty interesting. I put up the sort of the 4 heat meter responses of absolutely, I think so, I don't think so, or no way. And, 22% said absolutely, 36% said I think so, 33% said I don't think so, and 7.5% said no way. So just over 40% of people were unsure that they would keep Jalen Hurts. And we were talking about this before the show, that it really is about not having 2 alphas in the quarterback room. That sounds great to fans, but if you talk to anybody that's actually been in a quarterback room, you don't put 2 alphas in an NFL quarterback room. It doesn't work. The team divides up, picks sides. You start to see fractures. It just doesn't work. And fans sort of poo-poo that notion and say, nah, you get as much talent and you just jam it all in there. Anybody that's been in an NFL quarterback room says, And if the Eagles go out of their way to either through a trade or through the draft to get a top-flight quarterback, I think the possibility that they move Jalen Hurts is real. Now, again, he wasn't a first rounder. He was picked in the 2nd last year. We both liked him, but that might be too close to comfort for Philadelphia to have him sort of be in the clipboard role comfortably, and they might move him for assets, which I think they could get. So just an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Again, are they setting their sights for next year? Are they going all in and doing something like, dumping resources for Watson this year? If they do, I think Jalen Hurts definitely moves, and we'll see. But just a fascinating storyline that's sort of a subplot of Carson Wentz shipping out to Indiana.
On the Colts side of this, I think everybody's kind of been in universal agreement that if there was a place that Carson Wentz could be Carson Wentz again, it's Indy. With Frank Reich, who I think got the best out of him when Reich was in Philly. He's notoriously good at drilling in mechanics and making sure that quarterbacks stay mechanically sound from throw to throw, which was a problem for Wentz in the last couple years. He had a huge overstriding problem. His release has always been kind of a wind-up, but it really elongated even more after Reich left. Just mechanically, he was really, really sloppy, and Reich is known for kind of being a drill sergeant with mechanics, so I think that can help him out. In terms of style of offense, I think a kind of run-heavy, quick game-oriented attack like what you see with Frank Reich is good for Wentz to kind of keep him in structure. And you can take shots every now and then, but maybe I think limiting the amount of shots you try to take can kind of prevent Wentz from going into hero ball mode, which also got him into pretty substantial trouble last year in Philly. So I think Reich is a great coach for him. Offensive line, Anthony Costanzo just retired, but the rest of the line I think is still really, really good. If you can kind of go into this stacked offensive line class and come out of it with, maybe a diamond in the rough left tackle on day 2, I think you can work with that. Weapons-wise, you and I both love Michael Pittman. Pascal, I think, is a good number 2. Mo Alley Cox, I think, is an underrated red zone threat. Doyle, I think, is an underrated tight end as well. The running back room is absolutely phenomenal. Still not sure what's going to happen with T.Y., but if he comes back, you probably add like one more receiver, and I think they're fine there at that position. The defense is obviously, ready to rock and roll again with Matt Eberflus. So, like, this team is such a great supporting cast for Wentz that I absolutely believe that he could bounce back. Will he? It's tough to bet on it, but if there was one place that it was going to happen, it was going to be the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, the setting couldn't be better for him. His familiarity with Frank Reich, a good, strong offensive line in front of him, a great running game behind him, and some developing weapons for him on the outside, which they can certainly add to in this draft. The Colts, by no means did Ballard gut himself with this trade in terms of picks. They've still got some firepower to add people there, and like you said, they could use an offensive lineman, a tackle to replace Costanzo. But I think it's really between the ears for Carson Wentz. He looked completely wrecked last year, and that is a combination of his body being pretty broken down, the team surrounding him not being great in terms of the Eagles wide receivers not being able to separate. Early in the season, the Philadelphia offensive line was racked by injuries. He got sacked a lot. He ended up having to scramble. He ended up starting to leave clean pockets. When the line sort of stabilized a little bit later in the year, he was continuing those habits. And it really became a mental thing. You talked about mechanics. He wasn't in charge of those. And he started to do, in the second half of the year, things that were just really indefensible in most areas of quarterbacking. As you started to watch him, I remember having conversations with you and with other folks that watch quarterbacks and going, what the hell?
It was funny watching Mark Schofield just tear his hair out every single week saying, like, this isn't even recognizable from 2017.
Yeah. We're not talking about, progression or regression. We're talking about the TNT going off and looking at a completely different player who's just wrecked in pretty much every aspect, like his decision-making, his eyes, his mechanics, his inability to make smart decisions about I should just throw this away, instead just whipping stuff up in the middle of the field. It was really bad on all levels. And usually when a player regresses, it's like, his mechanics are off, or he's a little skittish and he's leaving clean pockets, but the rest of it is okay. This was kind of every checkbox for, red for a quarterback. Carson Wentz was checking them all and then just filling them in with like red Sharpie. It was really, really rough to watch. So can a guy sort of flush that, say, all right, totally new surroundings, totally new coaches, totally new surrounding staff with him, and just start clean? Can you really get all that out of your system in an offseason? And I agree with you. If there's any place you could do it, Indianapolis is the place. But it's a lot, even with all those things in place, even with Reich, who we know liked him or wouldn't have backed this trade because he worked with him in Philadelphia. Even with all that stuff in place, Carson Wentz is going to have to take, it's not even strides, right? He's going to have a sort of a massive rebuild, and a lot of that is going to be mental. He's going to have to trust Frank Reich. He's going to have to trust the offense. He's going to have to, quote unquote, trust the process. And if he can buy in and do that and return to any kind of normal form, I'm not talking about the 2017, MVP Carson, right? I'm talking about, or MVP track Carson. I'm talking about normal, neutral quarterbacking where you're not doing something awful almost every play. If he can do that, it's not going to be that far below what Rivers was doing with them this year, which was better than what I thought he would do. But, took that team to the end of the season in good position. I would say that would be almost best case right now. If he goes above that, it's just gold for Indianapolis. But again, I wouldn't bet any folding money on that because there's a lot of work to do here.
And I mean, let's be frank here, no pun intended. The Colts are too good. They're way too good of a team to have any sort of shot, not just this year, but in coming years, of getting a highly drafted quarterback. Like, it's just not going to happen. They're too well rounded. It's too strong of a roster. Chris Ballard is too damn good at his job to be in position to get a young stud quarterback. So this is all he's got. This is the only card he has to play, is throwing some picks at a guy who has talent and doing a reclamation project. Because if it works, guess what? Like, Carson Wentz, it doesn't cost them that much money. Like, again, the Eagles are taking almost $34 million cap hit. It's not that much money for the Colts. And getting a first and a third round pick for a guy that was playing at an MVP level 4 years ago, again, if it works, that is the only way they're going to get that level of quarterback play for that few, quote unquote, draft assets with how strong their roster is. So I don't want to say it's a desperation move, but it was kind of their only move, because the only other thing they could do is like pay a bunch of money to Jameis Winston, or, see if you can revive Cam Newton, or, it's all these other equally uncertain, I would say, options that could potentially be even more expensive. So it was kind of the only card they had to play. And I respect the guts of Ballard to trust his head coach and do it. We'll see if it works. I don't want to make any predictions either way, because I honestly don't know. But I think you hit the nail on the head. If it's going to work anywhere, it's going to be in Indy. And since we are on the topic of the Eagles, and this is a show all about new head coaching staffs, why don't we talk about the new staff for the Eagles that just made this trade? There were 7 openings in the NFL this offseason. It was the Eagles, the Jets, the Chargers, the Jaguars, Falcons, Texans, and Lions. Eagles are first up. They just hired Nick Sirianni, most recently the offensive coordinator of the Colts. So again, this is a very...
It's the bizarro connection between Indy and Philly, but they're just dropping people back and forth left and right.
Two very intertwined teams. Offensive coordinator Shane Steichen, who worked with Sirianni, and I think he also worked with Reich. I think they were all together on the same Chargers staff, if I remember correctly, but I know for sure that at least Sirianni and Steichen, or is it Steichen? I might have the pronunciation wrong. Both worked together for a long time with the Chargers. Sirianni was quarterback's coach. Steichen, whichever one it is, was a quality control coach, worked his way up. Now he's the offensive coordinator. Jonathan Gannon, he was also on that Colt staff with Sirianni. He coached DBs, and particularly he comes from like the Mike Zimmer tree, I guess you could say. So he's very much, press corners. It's a lot of, they call it like match 3 rip Liz, which is like a Saban thing that Mike Zimmer plays all the damn time. It's probably their most called coverage, and we saw Eberflus kind of transition to that Zimmer style, or Zimmer/Saban style of defense last year, even though he was mostly cover 2 in a couple years ago. Then he kind of played more match cover 3 rip Liz last year, and I would be willing to bet that Gannon had a pretty big influence on that. And also Xavier Rhodes, who played that way under Zimmer, probably had a big influence on that as well, because that's what he does well. So I'm curious to see if they stick with that style with the Eagles defense of mostly single high coverage shells and kind of match zone coverages. Overall, EJ, what is your first impression of Sirianni, Steichen, and Gannon as the top 3 dogs on this Eagles coaching staff?
It's the staff. As I was putting this agenda together, it's the staff I know the least about. I know the most about Sirianni. Steichen I know a little bit about. Gannon I was unfamiliar with. I had to do more research on him. So I would say I have a less strong impression of them from their previous stops. Philadelphia is a team that definitely looked a bit lost last year. They needed a fresh start. So I'm interested to see in the wake of Doug Peterson leaving, and there was a lot of, he said, she said when Doug Peterson left. Peterson's like, I'm glad to get out of there, and Philadelphia's like, we're glad you left, which is just a weird thing to say to a coach who won the Super Bowl so recently. But anyways, here we are, new staff, clean slate. Sirianni certainly has nice coaching history in terms of the people he's been with. He's got plenty of influences. Philadelphia obviously believes in him. But we're going to see. And like any new coaching staff, it's going to take a while to gel. They're going to have to, quote, find their guys on that roster. They're also going to have to find the veterans that don't want to buy in. They're like, forget this, I want out. That happens whenever there's a transition. And they're also going to have to start gathering players for their system. Now, presumably, they'll have a little while to do that. One and done coaching opportunities are pretty rare in the NFL. You have to really do something terrible to get fired after 1 year.
Or just work for the Cardinals.
There's that. It's rare, I said, not a never happens. But, it'll be really interesting to see how quickly he can get that staff and that roster gelling, whether or not they can get results. A lot of that, of course, is going to depend, as it always does in the modern NFL, as to who the quarterback is. And we don't know that yet. And, if they get a rookie quarterback, they basically buy themselves another year worth of developmental time. That's almost the rule, right? You go high in for a first-round quarterback, you're getting at least a half a year, even in the compressed NFL, to extend, because you got new everything. You got new coach, new staff, bunch of new players, and a new quarterback. So it'll depend, but it'd be really interesting to see what their product looks like on the field. How close is it? And this is the case with all the coaches we're going to be talking about, offensive and defensive. How close are they going to remain to their quote-unquote tree where they came from, or their previous experience? Or what new wrinkles are they going to put on that sort of bust them out of that envelope? And the Eagles will be a fascinating watch just based on that.
I would be willing to bet, short of like Zach Wilson or Justin Fields falling to 6th, which, let's be real, it's not going to happen. I would be willing to bet that 6th overall pick is either Jamar Chase or Devonta Smith, because Steichen in particular, who just came from working with Justin Herbert, which was, 4 verts all day, every day. We are throwing the ball down the field. We are taking advantage of isolation matchups with Keenan Allen and, Mike Williams and all those great receiving threats. And then, Sirianni, seeing what Pittman, who they invested a pretty high pick in last year, seeing what he could do as he kind of took over as the wide receiver 1 when he came back from compartment syndrome. I think these are 2 guys that understand the value of investing in the wide receiver position after seeing what those young wide receivers did last year. I would be willing to bet that, again, short of them getting Wilson or Fields at 6, which is not going to happen, I would be willing to bet that they invest high in wide receiver to make Jalen Hurts as successful as humanly possible. Because right now, when you look at that Philly receiving core, even though they just invested a first-round pick in a receiver last year, I think you and I are in agreement that Jalen Reagor doesn't really profile as a number 1. He profiles as potentially a very good Robin, but not necessarily a Batman. They don't have a single Batman on that entire roster, like a Jamar Chase or potentially Devonta Smith could be. It's Deshaun Jackson, who's way up there in years. It's Alshon Jeffrey, who's probably not going to be on the roster. It's Travis Fulgham, who's, I don't even know if he's a Robin. He's probably more like an Alfred. It's John Hightower. It's Quez Watkins, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Like, they don't have Greg Ward, a slot receiver. Like, they don't have that dude, that true alpha wide receiver. And regardless of who their quarterback is, I don't know if they're going to have success in developing somebody unless they have a true alpha wide receiver, which makes me think that if Jamar Chase is on that board at 6th overall, if he's not wearing green next year, I would be stunned.
Yeah, alpha wide receiver is a really interesting position discussion, and we're going to be talking about this all through draft season and on into next season. It's being elevated. Used to be, it was nice to have one, but you didn't need it. There were other approaches, but it wasn't like a building block of your team. And now with the modern NFL being as pass focused as it is very difficult to succeed. And it's funny that it's the Eagles and the Ravens, right? Two bird teams that aren't that far apart on the East Coast, both struggling with the same thing. The Ravens had the exact same thing. They didn't have an alpha. They had a lot of receiving talent, but Mark Andrews was probably their primary receiving threat on a lot of plays. And we're hearing the exact same talk for them in the offseason. They need a number one. They need to go, get Allen Robinson. They need to go get, Kenny Golladay. They need an alpha. And I think in the modern NFL, you do. You need an alpha wide receiver. You can't, get a cast of Smurfs anymore and make the run and shoot work. It's just not that kind of league. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if that was the pick in Philadelphia. And I've got to say that I'm a little more excited about Jalen Reagor's prospects because I would both say that he underperformed to what we thought he would coming out in the draft. And some of that's landing spot. Some of that might just be, hey, we might not be right about him. But here comes a head coach from Indianapolis that's had really good luck with receivers with his profile, right? A little bit smaller, really quick, can work outside or in the slot. That's a Reagor, feature. I'm really interested to see in year 2 if he's not a little bit more like Curtis Samuel was when Matt Rule came into the Panthers and said, "Oh no, we know what to do with your skill set. Hang out, man. We got plays for you." And I feel like that's an opportunity that Jalen Reagor's going to get now with this staff, and that excites me.
Well, fingers crossed, because Jalen Reagor has a ton of speed, has a ton of talent. Don't necessarily think it was maximized well last year, but it's a clean slate, new coaching staff, presumably new quarterback. If there was ever a time for a big second-year jump for Jalen Reagor, I think this is it. So I'm excited for him. Why don't we move on to the Jets now? Robert Saleh taking over for the recently departed Adam Gase, who actually I don't even know what Adam Gase is doing now. Did he ever get hired somewhere? I know there was rumors kicking around that he was going to get an OC job somewhere. I don't know if he did. I have to.
He's the last person I'm tracking in the coaching carousel, so I'll tell you.
I don't know if it was
I'll tell you tomorrow.
His agent putting stuff out or not, but I don't think he's been hired anywhere. Either way, the most important part is that he's no longer actively ruining Sam Darnold. So thank God for that. Robert Saleh taking over, who I'm a huge fan of, and he is putting together an absolutely phenomenal staff. Mike LaFleur, who's the passing game coordinator for the 49ers of the famous LaFleur family. His brother is the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, Matt LaFleur. Jeff Ulbrich, he was most recently Atlanta's assistant head coach and linebackers coach. Came up in Seattle, ex-linebacker for the 49ers for a long time. Came up in Seattle as a coaching assistant, went to UCLA, and where he developed, fun fact, Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr. He had a big hand in their development in college, and they both turned out to be phenomenal linebackers. Then went to Atlanta from there to work under Dan Quinn, who he previously worked under in Seattle, was their linebackers coach, where he developed Deion Jones as a rookie who then turned into one of the best Mike linebackers in the entire NFL. Devondre Campbell played really well and probably exceeded my expectations because of how great a linebacker coach he is. Just overall, he's one of the better linebacker coaches in the entire league, in my opinion. And he was one of the better linebacker coaches when he was in college as well. He's really, really phenomenal. Took over as the DC when Raheem Morris got the interim head coaching duty, and their defense improved almost overnight. It was truly tremendous. Like, it wasn't just Raheem Morris that turned the defense around. It was Jeff Ulbrich that had a big hand in that as well. So that's a great hire by Robert Saleh. And the fact that they both kind of speak the same language of that, Pete Carroll coaching tree, like, they don't really have to spend a whole lot of time getting on the same page in terms of terminology and checks and everything like that. Like, they can kind of hit the ground running and immediately get their system in place. Overall, I'm just absolutely ecstatic about this coaching staff. Also remember that Robert Saleh and Mike LaFleur go back a long time. They've been great friends. Robert Saleh's best friend is Matt LaFleur, Mike's brother. So, again, the chemistry on this staff, they all know each other. They've known each other forever. They all speak the same language. I am so excited to see what they do in New York because I think this is going to be just one hell of a staff.
Yeah, I think Robert Saleh became one of the hottest candidates in this cycle. We'll talk about the rest of these guys as we go down through, but he was really the top pick when people started talking to him and you started listening to longtime NFL players like Richard Sherman talking about Robert Saleh and saying, look, this is the guy you want leading your franchise. And we talked about that with Nick Sirianni, right? That the head coach, especially in a place like New York, is more than just a football coach. Now, Robert Saleh is an excellent football coach, but he's more than that. And I think he is ready and sort of tooled up to succeed in this environment. The rest of the staff and how they interact, their experience, the fact that they speak the same language. The Jets are looking for a really good upturn here. I don't want to say I couldn't be more excited about this staff, but that's almost true. And I think one of the players that we both like that just probably jumped out of his shoes when this got announced, like the whole staff, is Bryce Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Because Bryce Hall is a big physical corner with skills who can run. He can be manned up. That is absolutely within his skill set. He is, not unlike in some ways. I'm not saying he's the same as Richard Sherman, right? He is a big physical guy that can reroute receivers, can run with them. He's very smart, understands leverage and angles, and now he's got a defensive staff, and he's got a pretty good defensive line too, right? If they add a good edge player to go with Quentin Williams, like he's going to be getting some balls that get tossed up there. And I'm excited for a guy like Bryce Hall. He's got to be just jacked to have a head coach that understands defense, a guy like Ulbrich who comes in with a ton of experience and, again, a great track record of developing players. Now we get to see what he gets to do at sort of the next level, the coordinator level, not just the position coach level. And, again, the early returns from what he did with Atlanta's defense was night and day last year. That transition happened so quickly. Like people said, well, their defense will probably get better. It got better in like 2 weeks, and it was way better. And it was like, whoa. And again, most of the credit went to Raheem Morris, but Jeff Ulbrich was a big part of that. So guys like Bryce Hall, Quentin Williams, those guys are, they're excited. They just got one of the best head coaching candidates on the circuit to come to their team. He's got a defensive basis. He brought a defensive specialist with him. Those guys are really excited. And the guys on offense are like, hey, we don't have to deal with Adam Gase and Dowell Loggins anymore. So they're automatically excited.
There's been a lot of talk about, what are the Jets going to do at second overall? And honestly, I think with a coach like Mike LaFleur, you can make the argument for trying to revive Darnold. You can make the argument for trading Donald and taking Wilson. I would probably go with Wilson just because he'll be cheaper for longer than Darnold, and I would say he's even more talented than Darnold. So that's what I would do, but I could see the argument for both ways. But what's really interesting to me is pick 23, their other first-round pick, which doesn't get talked about as much, but I think you can go in a lot of different directions with it. Like if, Rashad Bateman's there, I could absolutely see them pairing up Bateman with Mims, and you have two dominant, at least potentially dominant outside receivers, with Jamison Crowder kind of working over the middle of the field. I think, with how strong this offensive line class is, if you see, potentially another tackle, if you want to move George Fant inside, I could see that. I could see Jeremiah, God, I always screw up this name, but I've spelled it out so many times. Owusu Koromoa from Notre Dame, who's he's like part safety, part linebacker, all kick ass. I'm going to do a film room episode on him because kind of projecting his position in the NFL is a little bit tricky, but specifically with a coaching staff that has Jeff Ulbrich on it, who coached a similarly sized linebacker in Deion Jones, who also came out at about 6'1", 220, which is the same size as Owusu-Koramoah. I would not be shocked if they take him at 23. They pair him with CJ Mosley. He's more of the kind of lighter, faster coverage linebacker. Mosley's the ass kicker in between the tackles. You pair them up together. That kind of completes the front seven, with the one extra need maybe being edge. But there's a couple guys I'm kind of eyeing on day 2 for them. Like that, I think would be a phenomenal pick for them. Just knowing what I know about this defensive staff and how much Robert Saleh values linebacker, how much Ulbrich values linebacker, and how much they kind of need another one. There's very few guys, I think, defensively that fit this system better than Owusu-Koramoah. And I really, really, really hope that happens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see which way they go again with that second pick in the first round. And I could see them absolutely adding offensive line depth and saying we're going to build from the inside out. We're going to start in the trenches and go back, front to back. That makes a ton of sense. There is absolutely validity to saying, hey, most likely they're going to grab a quarterback up high. And we just talked about it. Do you have an alpha? We both believe in Denzel Mims, and he showed some good flashes. It's tough to really give him a fair grade after playing under Gase and Dowell Loggins. But we like Mims, but is he the Batman or is he the Robin? Is he the alpha or the beta, right? But either way, he's a good player, and he's got a great future into these guys. But I could absolutely see them in a very deep wide receiver class grabbing, the highest rated guy that they like and pairing him with Mims. And then you've got a really nice sort of foursome. And if you're talking about that San Francisco, or even if you look at what LaFleur's done and you think it's going to be somewhat similar to what, Matt has done, you've got a really nice foursome at wide receiver. Whoever you pick up at the later half of the first round, Mims on the other side outside, and then inside you got some interesting options. You got Jamison Crowder, who's a little bit underrated, and Braxton Berrios, the little speedster out of Miami, who is just kind of a flash. He's like Hunter Renfrow. He's a flash possession receiver, but he's got some juice to make things happen again. And if you put him at the 3 or the 4, that's fine, especially if you've got those towers outside. That would be a fun offense right there. So I could see him going offensive line. I could see him going wide receiver with that second pick. Either way, and then probably doing the opposite of what they didn't do in the first round and the second round. If they went wide receiver, picking up a tackle, or if they went tackle, getting a wide receiver, or, again, JOK is what we're going to call him. Owusu-Koramoah, JOK. He'd be a fantastic fit because he is the modern version of a coverage nightmare, right? He's that all-around dime backer. It doesn't really matter what you call him. He's got speed. He hits. He flashes on tape. He can cover slot receivers straight up. You don't need to sub him out for that. So would be a great chess piece for them as well if they decided that, hey, we kind of got the offensive line we need. We're going to grab him, and then we're going to grab a wide receiver in the second. Any of those strategies work, and they've got a bunch of picks. They've got a staff on both sides, I think, that can develop players now. At least on paper, they look like that. It's gonna be cool, and I think Jets fans are legitimately excited. Like Rich Eisen is probably going to bed at night smiling because he's gonna have a lot to root for next year.
When the Jets hired Gates, I don't actually remember any Jets fans being excited about it. I remember them hating the hire at the time, and then just hating it even more, a little bit more every single day until Gase was fired a couple years later. Right now, I don't know a single Jets fan that doesn't like the Saleh hire. They are universally in approval of it, and I think for good reason. And I think the Jets really knocked this one out of the park. I think they did a phenomenal job. Why don't we move on to the Chargers here? Another coaching staff that I'm a really big fan of, mainly because I'm a huge fan of Brandon Staley, who's been kind of a big up-and-coming defensive coach the last few years. He's a Vic Fangio disciple, most recently defensive coordinator for the Rams, one of the most dominant defenses in the league, running a very similar system to Vic Fangio, which probably makes sense why he brought in Ronaldo Hill, 10-year NFL player, most recently the DBs coach under Fangio for the Broncos, also coached DBs in Miami for a hot minute. I think that they are going to work together very, very well because similar to Saleh and Ulbrich, they both kind of came up in the same system. They speak the same language. They don't really have to, translate terminology in terms of, oh, what do we call this check? When do we call it in this situation? If you get, trips to the boundary, what's your check? If you get trips to the field, what's your check? Like, they all kind of know that stuff already because they both worked under Vic, who does things a very specific way, and Vic's defense is very different than most other defenses in the league. And so, again, just kind of having that familiarity, I think, is huge. Joe Lombardi, who's a long time assistant coach for Sean Payton down in New Orleans, who took a couple-year break to go be the offensive coordinator for the Lions and then went back to the Saints. Most recently was their quarterbacks coach. He's now getting his second shot to be an OC under Staley. I'm very intrigued to see what happens there because when you look at his stint with the Lions, back then they had Megatron, they had Golden Tate, at the time one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver duo in the league. You had a young Eric Ebron who he never really reached his potential, but I don't think he was necessarily bad in Detroit outside of like really awfully timed drops, but I don't think he was awful. Their running game wasn't great under him, but that might also be because their number one running back was Amir Abdullah, so I don't necessarily give him, think it was a fair shake in that regard. The offensive line was okay, but again, not great. And it just kind of seemed like the offense could put up yards, but they couldn't put up points, which is a stark contrast to, when he's in New Orleans. And obviously a lot of that has to do with Sean Payton and Drew Brees, but he was a part of some really, really, really great offenses in New Orleans over the years. And it was interesting to see that not translate at all to his time in Detroit. So I'm very curious to see if he's able to kind of recapture that, Sean Payton West Coast offense magic with Justin Herbert over in LA. Again, I'm kind of wait and see mode on that, but I'm more confident in their defensive staff with Staley kind of, heading the ship there, Ronaldo Hill. I very much love that duo. And especially with the Chargers personnel on defense. I mean, Derwin James is tailor-made for this type of system. He's going to be dominant in it. The defensive line, again, they rush four so much in this kind of defense that you need to have a good front four, and they do. And that's even before we add even more picks in the draft. I think this Chargers defense is going to be crazy good with Staley and Hill.
Yeah, they're set up with it in terms of players, and it's how fast they adapt to it. Because you said, look, Fangio's system is different. As a Bears fan, I understand that. They'd love to rush four, and I would take the Chargers front four with almost anybody in the league. Maybe just a tick below the Washington football team, but really close, and their depth is amazing there as well. So they're going to be able to keep that rush fresh, which is going to keep everybody else in their lanes, which in the Fangio system is a very particular set. So it's how fast they adapt to doing something different, but their roster is amazing. Their talent is tremendous. And they're going to probably spend some picks on offense, maybe not, but their tight end could be leaving in free agency. And the symmetry of this just hit me as you were talking about it. Joe Lombardi, the quarterback coach of the Saints, who's been working with Drew Brees forever, goes back to the Chargers to work with a quarterbacking phenom. That's time is a flat circle, man.
And also one more semi echo here. Lombardi working under Sean Payton has always been a heavy advocate for the tight end position. That's why when he showed up as OC for the Lions, they invested a first-round pick in Eric Ebron, and this is going to hurt Lions fans, so please bear with me, ahead of Aaron Donald. They had a chance to take Aaron Donald. They took Ebron instead because Lombardi said, I want a really athletic tight end. He worked with Jimmy Graham in New Orleans, Jared Cook. That offensive philosophy has always placed such a huge weight on the tight end position. At 13th overall, the Chargers, who might be waving goodbye to Hunter Henry, may have an opportunity to draft Kyle Pitts. And I would not be shocked if Lombardi pounds the table once again for a difference-making, just absolutely ridiculously talented tight end who is, I mean, let's make no mistake here, a much better prospect than Eric Ebron was. And Eric Ebron, athletically, was a top-tier tight end prospect. Kyle Pitts is all of that and more. I kind of don't hate that fit, and I also wouldn't be surprised if it happens considering who is on their coaching staff.
Yeah, I don't hate it at all. Kyle Pitts is a guy we're going to be talking about a lot because he is a freak. And I mean a freak in all the best ways. Don't let the tight end moniker fool you. Kyle Pitts is wide receiver 1 in this draft. I mean, let's just call him what he is. He's 6'6", has ridiculous body control. And the thing that kills me, this came out this week, when he plays his first NFL game, he's going to be 20.
He's a puppy, man.
20. He's 6'6". He already moves like better than any power forward in the NBA and can score from pretty much anywhere on the field. If you watch his tape, it's staggering. If he went and worked with Justin Herbert and, Joe Lombardi, who, again, is a huge tight end fan, they've always had a pretty strong string of tight ends. They got Adam Troutman last year, who was a guy we really liked and I think has a good future. Look, if that fit happens and they have those receiving weapons on the outside, Austin Eckler as a great dual threat, completely underrated dual threat out of the backfield, and Herbert gets to throw to those guys, like, yikes. Yeah. That offense is going to be staggeringly good, but it'll be fascinating to see how Brandon Staley adapts in the head spot. He was the Bears linebacker coach, not that many years ago, just a few years ago, and now he's a head coach in the NFL. And again, that's a whole different tier or level of responsibility. Now, he's one of those guys that, got close to Sean McVay and got a head coaching job. This is from the defensive side, not the offensive side, but McVay's got that coach-making magic, so it'll be really interesting to see how Brandon Staley adapts to that head spot. He's got a very talented roster, and I know this is a thing. You live in that market. There was some disappointment when he was named the head coach, which is a little rough because everybody thought they were going to get the offensive coordinator from the Buffalo Bills, Brian Daboll, and everybody was like, man, Brian Daboll with Justin Herbert, it's going to be just like Josh Allen. We're set, and it didn't happen for whatever reason. They picked Staley, who is a very talented coach, and a lot of people were like, aw, and you kind of had to push people back from the edge and go, no, not aw, like, he's a really good coach. You should be excited. But there was a little bit of that sort of sticker shock change at the end. Overall, I think this is one of the staffs that's going to be the most fun to watch. I might think I do think probably the Jets have the best staff. We'll talk about that at the end, but this is a very close second. This is not the consolation prize. This is a good staff, a great roster, far better roster than what Saleh and his staff are inheriting in New York, and should be good very quickly.
You mentioned that Chargers fans were hoping for Brian Daboll because he could develop Justin Herbert, and I get that, but here's the thing. Brandon Staley, when he was a player, he was a quarterback. He started 2 years at quarterback at Dayton before becoming a grad assistant at Northern Illinois after he graduated. So he played the position, and then becoming a defensive coach and learning how to frustrate, or I'd say learning to frustrate quarterbacks based on his experience as a quarterback and knowing what frustrated him. Having a coach with experience on both sides of the ball, I think, is the best way to develop a young player, because he's been in Justin Herbert's shoes. Obviously not as a starter in the NFL, but he played the position. And being a defensive coach, he can literally sit Herbert down and say, look, when they're calling this coverage, they're doing it because of X, Y, and Z. They want your eyes to get, to drift over here so that they can bring this guy from this angle. Like, he can break down defenses so well for Herbert. with his experience as a quarterback and knowing how Herbert thinks as a quarterback, I think this is going to be better for his development. And I almost kind of liken it to Bill Belichick. There was a great interview on the Make Defense Great Again podcast with Coach Bass, friend of the show, and he interviewed Dean Pease for, I think it was like 2 hours. And one of the nuggets that Pease, said in that show was when he worked with the Patriots, Bill Belichick spent maybe like 30 to 40 minutes every week total in defensive meetings. The rest of his time was spent with Tom Brady, breaking down defenses and showing like, hey, when they go into this shell, here's why they're doing it. Here's what they're calling. Here's how they're affecting you. And he would break down defensive tape for Tom Brady from a defensive coach perspective to teach Tom Brady how to read defenses. I think Brandon Staley could very easily do the exact same thing with Justin Herbert. And the fact that he played quarterback makes it even easier for him to do that. Like, if anything, I think Staley's going to develop Herbert better than Dable would have. And that's saying a lot because I think Dable would have done a phenomenal job. But Brandon Staley was a great, great hire.
Yeah, he was highly desired, had many of the interviews either right before or right after on Saleh's heels. They were the two sort of hot candidates that shuffled around over that, hot stove 3-4 day period before everybody was trying to, get a chair before the music stopped. And they were the sort of top two chairs off the board and for good reason. I think Staley, your point about having extensive experience on both sides as an offensive player, understanding offensive systems and then coming in and trying to design systems to stop those is going to give a balance to the development of a guy like Herbert that I'm not going to say he wouldn't have gotten, but I think he might have gotten in a different way from Dable. It's not that Dable doesn't understand defensive coverages. He obviously does because he rips them apart with his offensive strategy. He can play that game. Two can play that game. Dable can rip apart defenses just as much as defenses try and rip apart Josh Allen. So it'll be fascinating, but very quality hire, interesting staff, tremendous roster. Chargers fans should be kind of pumped, and that might be foreign territory for them, just like Jets fans.
Agreed. Before we get on to the Jaguars, because there's a lot to unpack with the Jaguars staff, I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for the week, Mack Weldon. Mack Weldon is a premium men's essentials brand that believes in smart designs and high-quality fabrics. They offer a one-stop shop for men's basics, whether it's socks, shirts, hoodies, underwear, polos, and active shorts. Whatever you need in a wide variety of customizable fabrics like AirKnit X, Dry Knit, and Warm Knit, Mack Weldon has you covered. They also have a totally free loyalty program called Weldon Blue. Level 1 gets you free shipping for life. Once you reach level 2, by spending at least $200 total, Mack Weldon gives you 20% off of every order for the next year. And I can tell you from personal experience, I wear the Ace zip-up hoodie. It's the only full zip hoodie I even wear anymore because it's kind of that perfect thickness for California winter where, it gets like 55 degrees and, well, EJ, you're probably rolling your eyes because 55 degrees is cold to me. But for me, like I would say like a thinner but also very well insulated full zip hoodie is exactly what I need. And the Mack Weldon full zip Ace hoodie has just been fantastic for me. If you see anything in the Mack Weldon collection that you like over on MackWeldon.com and you want to pick it up for yourself, you can get 20% off your first order at MackWeldon.com/bootleg and enter promo code bootleg. Plus, if you spend $75 or more, you will get a free silver mask. Again, that is MackWeldon.com/bootleg, promo code bootleg for 20% off. Again, thank you to Mack Weldon for sponsoring this week's show. And with that, EJ, let's talk about the Jaguars because, as I mentioned, there's a lot to go over here. Obviously the hiring of Urban Meyer created a lot of waves. The hiring of assistant head coach and / linebackers coach Charlie Strong didn't get as much reaction, but to me that was really interesting because Charlie Strong is, I don't want to say he's controversial, but it seems like everybody has very again, pardon my pun, strong opinions about Charlie Strong, because even though he's had a lot of success in some places, the fact that like Texas really didn't work out for him, I think has kind of loomed over a lot of people. But I thought he was a great coach at Louisville. So I personally like the Charlie Strong hire. A lot of people did not for whatever reason. The Darrell Bevell hire also, I think, got criticized pretty heavily. But the fact that they also brought in Brian Schottenheimer specifically to coordinate the passing game, I thought that was great. So I think that kind of duo of ex-Seahawks coordinators can work pretty well. Joe Cullen, I'm not super familiar with personally, but he was the defensive line coach for the Ravens for a lot of years, and they're one of the better defensive lines in the league, so I'm pretty optimistic about that. The one hire that I really didn't like was Chris Doyle, and that ended up only being like 24 hours, which, I mean, it's Urban Meyer, so I guess I wasn't too surprised by it, and I'm happy that it kind of... what's the word? Undid itself pretty quickly, but fizzled. Yeah, we'll use that word and be kind, but I definitely don't think that should have happened in the first place. Cause I mean, my God, can you just Google the man before you hire him? But overall, there's been a lot of mixed reactions to this Urban Meyer staff. Some positive, some very negative. For me personally, I'm very on the fence. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's more so I just have no idea what to expect.
Yeah, it's a very strange mix of a coaching staff. Urban Meyer, tremendous success at the college level. We don't probably need to go over that if you follow college football at all. You've definitely heard about Urban Meyer. You've definitely seen his teams and his accomplishments. Nothing to argue with there. Tons of success wherever he's gone. Also, some controversy in most places where he's gone. You can also Google Urban Meyer and find things that have trailed him, throughout his career. And winning cures almost everything, including those issues. He's been out of football for a little bit in terms of the coaching side. He's been an analyst, still high profile, and he's been lurking, right? This was the guy that was hanging out, waiting for an opportunity that he thought was prime, and moving in. And, he made some sort of, if you believe the media reports, some lukewarm runs at a couple other jobs, but this was the one. And he saw it. He said, look, I get the first pick overall, which means I can take whichever quarterback I want, which is important in his systems, always has been. I have a ton of cap space, so I can go out and sign some free agents. The roster is not bereft of talent. We've got players on the roster. I've got an owner who's going to support me. I'm back in the warm weather. This was the job that he decided to go all in for. Obviously, sort of won that round of interviews, ends up with the position, and then starts assembling a staff, which is an interesting mix of college coaches like Charlie Strong. Look, 38-year coaching career, well-traveled football coach, has had some very high-profile stops with mixed results. But I like Charlie Strong. I'm like you. I actually think he's a good football coach. Darrell Bevell is going to give some Seahawks fans nightmares. Brian Schottenheimer, who was sort of leading the Let Russ Cook movement before that got shut down, will have a chance to do a similar thing in Jacksonville. Let Trevor cook, maybe, is going to be the slogan for that. And, they're going to. Urban Meyer has always let his quarterbacks, run the show. And it's going to be very interesting to see how all that translates. The Cullen thing is interesting. He's got some talent on that side of the ball, but a lot of that was sold off in the fire sale. The Jaguars used to have a dominant defensive line. They have some talent there, but they need to restock a little bit on that side of the ball. The offense, outside of the offensive line, is a little bit closer. Obviously, a great rookie running back performance. I think more receiving weapons than people really want to talk about or were used last year that we're going to see some more of, certainly with a guy presumably like Trevor Lawrence throwing the ball around for them. But I'm really interested to see how the staff gels, because they don't all speak the same language. They don't all come from the same system. They don't even really all come from the same level. So seeing how fast, how quickly that staff can gel, and if they can gel well and deliver a unified message, that the players are really going to resonate to. That's often a thing with college coaches coming to the NFL using the same sort of tactics that they used in college, and college and the NFL are not the same. You can't do a lot of the stuff you do in college to a bunch of grown millionaires and have them work. So it'll be interesting to see if Urban adapts. And the Chris Doyle thing was not a great start to that. It never should have happened in the first place. Chris Doyle did some terrible things at Iowa, quite frankly. And, they knew that. And somebody said, this is the first time in Urban Meyer's probably whole coaching career, somebody's told him he can't do something. Mm-hmm. Right? They said no to him. And I'm sure he thought, what are you saying to me? Like, I'm the head coach. I can do what I want. This is my MO. This is what I do. And then everybody said, no, Urban, this ain't the same. You can't do this. Like, we're not going to let you do this. And he went, oh, well, that's different. All right, I guess you're not hired, Chris. And moved on, which, was a good thing. He could have tried to go for the wall for Chris Doyle, which would have been a suicide move, but he could have tried it. He didn't. So there's some adjustment already happening. And I'm like you, I'm questioning how well this staff meshes. Look, the team's set up incredibly well. We talked about the Chargers having a good roster. Yeah, they got a better roster than the Jaguars, but they don't have more assets. This roster could look very, very different after the draft and free agency, depending how hard they go in free agency. They could be loaded straight up to the gills with talent, and it's all about how quickly the system comes together between the coaches, between the offensive and defensive side, and then how quickly the players buy in.
Two thoughts. One, I looked it up while you were talking. I did not realize this about Charlie Strong. He was Urban's defensive coordinator when they were winning championships at Florida. I did not know that. But that was the job that got him the Louisville head coaching job, where he won, back-to-back conference titles, was, conference coach of the year. I think that was in the Teddy Bridgewater years when he took that Louisville job. Then Teddy got drafted in 2014, and then 2014, I think, is when he took the Texas job, which did not go well at all. But interestingly enough, I didn't realize that he was the co-defensive coordinator and then the full defensive coordinator for two of Urban's title runs with the Gators. And then second point, just touching one more time on the Chris Doyle thing, I almost wish they retained him because I really wish that I could have seen what would have happened if Doyle tried that bullshit on actual grown men with millions of dollars. You look at some of the comments that former Iowa players that are now in the NFL have gone public with about Doyle, not just recently, but even go back to last summer.
Many of them.
It's not just a few. It's a lot of former Hawkeyes. Jaleel Johnson, for instance, Vikings defensive tackle. At least I think he's a free agent now. He put out a tweet that Chris Doyle would go around stepping on players' fingers as they would warm up before a lift. Like, the dude's an asshole. Let's just be real about it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, in college, you can get away with being an asshole coach, which he did for a long time, for 20 years, because, these are 18, 19-year-old kids that are dependent on scholarships. Not the same thing in the NFL. These are fathers with grown man strength and millions of dollars, and they're not going to put up with that shit. So I almost wish they would have kept him, just because the first time he tried anything like that, they would have put him through a wall. Guaranteed. And I would have loved it.
Yeah, I forgot to mention not to try and take shine off the Chris Doyle thing or any more shine than he took off himself, but I forgot to mention the most important thing about Charlie Strong.
What's that?
And we talked about the Sean McVay aura in the NFL. If you get near Sean McVay, you're likely to get a head coaching job. Well, there's a job like that or a set of jobs like that in college. And it's going and doing anything for Nick Saban.
Yep.
Right? And what was Charlie Strong doing last year? Everybody's like, well, didn't he leave South Florida like a year ago? Yeah, he did. He was a defensive analyst for Alabama during their national championship run last year. So, voila, Wash your hands of that. He is fresh and clean and ready to have success because Nick Saban is nothing if not a coach rehabber, including the current coach of Texas, strangely enough, Steve Sarkisian, who, had a bad run, ended up going to Nick Saban's, halfway house for coaches, for college coaches, rehabbed his image, again, led them to tremendous success at Alabama and got the Texas head coaching job and looks to be sort of off and running there. So Charlie Strong's got that going for him. Let's see if it carries over to the pros.
Why don't we get into the Falcons here? New head coach Arthur Smith. Fun fact is the richest Arthur in the building. His family's actually worth more money than Arthur Blank's family. Fun fact.
What?
You didn't know that?
No. Did it sound like I know that?
Yeah.
I'm like, richer than Arthur Blank, the Home Depot founder?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Well, you know what company Arthur Smith's dad founded?
You're going to tell me and I'm going to wilt.
FedEx.
Oh, that little outfit. The one with the trucks that I occasionally see like every other year.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. No, I had no idea. That's fascinating. Yeah,
and Arthur Smith wanting to be his own man, carve out his own path to success, and he has. He's been a great offensive coach for a long time. Most recently, offensive coordinator of the Titans, where I think it was back-to-back years they were among the top scoring offenses in the league, largely because he figured out something that even Matt LaFleur didn't when he was OC for the Titans, which is that Derrick Henry is pretty damn good and that you should give him a lot of carries. Kind of took Matt LaFleur like halfway through the season to figure that one out. Arthur Smith, from week one, straightforward, when he took the job, was like, yeah, I'm going to give that dude 20 touches a game and see what happens. And fast forward to 2020 and 2,000 yards happened. So he's a really good offensive coach, kind of in the similar mold to LaFleur and Shanahan and all those kind of guys where, we're running outside zone, a lot of bootlegs, deep shots off play action, slide route after slide route after slide route. Like it's very much a quarterback friendly system. So I think Matt Ryan's going to love it. Also considering that Matt Ryan was in a similar system with the exact same language when Kyle Shanahan was there. Like Arthur Smith isn't really going to have to teach him anything. It's all the same shit. So I think that offense is going to hit the ground running. I'm curious to see what Dave Ragone is going to do. He was most recently the passing game coordinator and quarterback coach for the Bears, which I don't necessarily put their offensive stalling on him when you look at who was throwing the ball and who was blocking and all that kind of stuff. Like, wasn't exactly great talent, but I am curious to see how he fits into the picture in terms of play calling and game planning and all that kind of stuff. I don't think we've really gotten any clear answers on who's going to be doing what yet. And then defensive coordinator is going to be the legendary Dean Pease coming out of retirement. Also from the Titans, Arthur Smith, worked on that same staff with him under Mike Vrabel. He retired before last season and apparently got really bored, so he came out of retirement for this year to be Arthur Smith's DC. Really, really strong coaching staff, in my opinion. At least particularly with Smith and Pease. That's kind of all you need. I don't really have a handle on Dave Ragone's role yet, but even if he's just there from helping to game plan and all that kind of stuff, I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, Arthur Smith really was one of the coaches that on my other podcast we were talking about for a wish list for the Bears had they moved on from Matt Nagy, which a lot of people thought they were going to do. And my partner Jeff Berkus was really Arthur Smith was his guy. I could absolutely see where he's coming from. Great success. Interesting to see him go to the Jaguars in terms of, the Shanahan system is going to roll right in there. Obviously have a ton of great wide receiving talent, even more so than where he came from in the Titans, where they had 2 really good wide receivers this year. They probably got 4 really good wide receivers on the Falcons, so that's going to be a luxury. But what do you think the odds are that the Falcons draft a running back this year?
What's their pick?
They have Todd Gurley. It's not where, it's whether. Todd Gurley, Brian Hill from Wyoming, Quadri Olison from Pittsburgh, who I actually liked a little bit, and Ito Smith, who I like a lot from Southern Mississippi, but he's a guy that's 5'9", 195. You're going to use him in a certain capacity. I think he runs above that weight, but he's not your number one. So, coming from a system where, again, you had a running back who you were like, nope, I'm going to give that guy 15 to 20 carries, which is extremely rare in the modern NFL. Very few backs average over 15 carries. In fact, there's usually about 2 per year that break that threshold anymore. And he's got this, assemblage of talent in Gurley, Hill, Olison, and Smith. I bet they draft a running back somewhere.
Dare I say Najee Harris, top of round 2?
Oh, God. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a bunch this year that fit if you want something. And this is somewhat of a misnomer. I can't say for Smith in particular, but a lot of people, when a coach, say Brian Dable had left the Bills and gone to a team without a quarterback, they're like, he's gonna draft, a big, strong, cannon arm quarterback because that's what he had before. Where, coaches are adaptable; they'll work with the talent. So I'm not saying that they're gonna draft a tank of a running back and have him run over everybody for the Falcons because that's what he did with the Titans. I don't think that's the case, but I think he values the contribution from the running back position. He likes having a solid workhorse back there, whether or not it's at the level of Derrick Henry, and I don't really see that guy on the Falcons roster right now. So I'd say the replacement's a little bit more likely there. But oh man, yeah, Najee Harris on the Falcons would be a little bit scary actually because they've got a quarterback. They've got
literally a perfect fit.
Yeah, they've got a great wide receiving core already. They've got a very serviceable tight end, and you add probably the most talented overall running back in this class, certainly one of the top 2. Yeah, that would be really cool. Again, the early round running back discussion in terms of selection, we don't have to have that one again. We've had it a lot. Dean Pease, 48 seasons of coaching, and that's with a couple off, right? That's staggering. 50 years worth of coaching experience in one guy. As far as Ragone goes, it won't be all that different in Atlanta than it was in Chicago. And that's a lot of people asking, well, hey, look, if presumably Arthur Smith is calling the plays, what does Dave Ragone do again? And there was a lot of that. He was the quarterback's coach up until last year when he got moved out of that role. They moved John DeFilippo into that role. And so they made Ragone the passing game coordinator. And there was always question, very similarly, hey, if Nagy's calling the plays, like, what is Dave Ragone doing? And nobody ever really had a good answer for that for really their offensive coordinator or their quarterback's coach. So I'm not really sure about what he's done. He's got an interesting resume. I remember scouting him as a player, which is one of those things that happens when you get old. But I don't know what his role is going to be, and I don't really know what his contribution is going to be because, as you said, in Chicago, it could have been masked by who they had at the position, or just the fact that Nagy's offense didn't really seem to take off until he gave the reins over to Bill Lazor. So I'm not sure what Ragone brings, and I'm not sure we're going to know with him in his role with the Falcons because Smith is really most likely going to be running that show. I don't think he's relinquishing the play calling duties because that's what got him the head coaching job. And that's not typically what those coaches do these days.
Yeah, it's more and more common these days for offensive coordinators that when they get hired for head coaching jobs, they basically just, they're still the offensive coordinator just with extra responsibilities on top of that. That seems to kind of be what happens a lot where, offensive coaches, more so than defensive coaches, they're like, well, I got this far by calling plays, so I'm going to keep calling plays. I would not be shocked if that's also what happens with Arthur Smith. Not saying that's a bad thing, just kind of being realistic about it. So I'm curious to see what happens.
And it's gonna mask Ragone's role if that's the case. So we're still gonna be questioning next year, like, well, what did Dave Ragone do? But one note about this coaching staff that's kind of fun, a little bit farther down the coaching ranks, Justin Peele is the tight ends coach. And yes, that is the same Justin Peele that was the tight end out of Oregon, ended up playing for the Ravens, dealt with a lot of injuries, but I always thought he was quite a bit of fun as a player. Thought he was pretty skilled, a little bit ahead of his time at the sort of lighter tight end role, and didn't know, as I don't know with a lot of players that transition directly into coaching, that he had transitioned into coaching, and he is going to be the tight ends coach for the Falcons, and he's got some talented players there, so it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, he was, if I remember correctly, he was kind of like, how do I put this? Evan Ingram before Evan Ingram? Like, not as fast.
Yeah,
but...
he was the move tight end that was much more receiver than blocker before that was an en vogue thing.
Yeah.
So everybody called it a bug, not a feature, and now everybody calls it a feature, not a bug. But no, if he hadn't had a series of injuries, he was a fun player when he was healthy on the field. He was fun to watch, and I saw his name pop up on this staff, and I thought, well, that's notable.
Well, he was the tight ends coach for Philly for the last 6 years with Ertz and Goddard. So he's turned out some good players.
He's used to working. Yeah, he's used to working with quality talent, and he's got more quality talent at that position in Atlanta. So I thought it was a notable addition to the staff.
Well, EJ, why don't we get to Houston?
Bum bum bum.
So David Culley, newest Texans head coach. Again, keep in mind everything that I say in this segment. I have nothing against David Culley. I have nothing against Tim Kelly. I have nothing against Pep Hamilton, Lovie Smith, any of these guys. But let's be honest. Whether we're talking about Kelly at OC, Hamilton as quarterback coach, Lovie as DC, Culley as head coach, these guys are going to be here max 2 years. They were brought in to get this organization through whatever dumpster fire is about to happen, assuming Deshaun gets traded, which all reports indicate that he wants to get the hell out of Dodge, and there's nothing that's going to convince him otherwise. He would rather sit out the year than play another down for this team, and I believe it, especially when you hear about the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Some has been public, some has not been public. It's really bad. And I don't blame him for not wanting to play another down for this team. I think eventually he will be traded. I think somebody's going to just come up with an offer and blow him away, whether it's San Francisco, whether it's Miami, whoever the hell it is. Somebody's going to trade for Deshaun, I think. And so when you look at this team that has no money, no picks, soon to be no quarterback, no hope for the future, these guys are brought in to guide a tank. Like, not an intentional tank, but a very what's the word? An inevitable disaster of a tank. This is not a good football team. It's about to get even worse. They don't have the resources to get better. It's going to suck, and suck really bad for whatever Texans fans are remaining on the ship, and there's not many of them. So I don't think that these guys are going to be on the staff by 2023. I think this team is going to be completely gutted from the inside out. Again, I'm assuming Deshaun gets traded. If Deshaun doesn't get traded and somehow ends up playing for this team again, maybe I'll reverse course on this. But based on what we know right now, this team is going to be completely gutted over the next 2 years. They're going to strip all unnecessary salary. They're going to collect as many picks as humanly possible. They're going to pray to God that some great quarterback is coming down the pipe by 2023 that they can pick up high in the draft. Are they going to be as good as Deshaun? Almost guaranteed no, but that seems to be the course that this team is on. I do not believe that David Culley was brought in because he was the best candidate. I believe he was brought in because he's the only guy that would take the job, because he knows it's going to be a 2-year stop, and that's about it.
Yeah, this is not an inspiring staff. We had some categories at the end of the show for, hey, what's the best staff? What's the staff we're most excited about? And I was like, trying to be kind, and said biggest question mark. And we have some questions about Urban Meyer's staff and how that's going to gel. It's not the same category. We're not even talking about the same neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We might not even be talking about the same country. The Texans somebody posted the other day, oh, it's cool to see that the NFL is now 31 teams in a weird cult. And I was like, yep, God. That's about right. Like, that's the experience we're hearing being described in Texans land right now, is things are kind of off the rails. So if you might think that every team in the league would zig, the Texans are going to zag. They're going to do something that you just really can't explain with sort of logic or best practice behavior. Those aren't really rules that apply right now to Houston. So they had to get somebody, and I think pretty much everybody, including Eric Bieniemy, there was a very sort of famous, like, we're not going to interview him. Oh, no, we're going to interview him because everybody said we should interview him and we didn't, and we're getting canned for it. So we're going to bring him in for an interview, which was the most farcical thing ever. And if I was Eric Bieniemy, I probably would have said, yeah, thanks, but no.
And a couple days after that interview, by the way, Christian Fourier went on the radio. Christian Fourier, former Colorado player in the same era as Eric Bieniemy. Like somehow they know each other. They didn't overlap at Colorado, but I'm assuming, Colorado alumni, they stay close. Somehow they overlap. But he went on the radio, WEEI, up in New England and said, look, from what I've heard from Eric's camp, he is not taking the Houston job no matter what they offer. He did the interview, but he's not taking the job. He wants no part of it. And as soon as that happened, I knew shit was going downhill. And then a few days after that was when the Culley hire was announced, and the day after that was when Deshaun's trade request became public. Apparently, it happened even like the week before that.
Yeah, that Culley knew about it, because I don't think there's any way that you bring on a head coach whether or not he knows he's a piñata don't tell him about something like Deshaun Watson wants a trade, because that's kind of important to your job. And Culley took it anyways. Again, he knows it's a chance to, do what he can, but his chance of success is not really up to him, because he is not shopping for the groceries and making the meal. He's probably only doing a quarter of that. He knows that, and he took it anyways. He's got his own reasons. It's going to give him a bunch of financial security. NFL coaching salaries are pretty darn good. They are also guaranteed, so it doesn't matter how long he coaches for the Texans. He's getting paid.
Yeah. This is his retirement package.
That's right, and I can't fault him for that. Lifetime football coach, and we're going to offer you, generational wealth. We're going to offer you several $1 million a year to coach for some number of years. You're pretty much set after that. And it's only going to be 24 months and you're out of there because they're just going to burn the place down around you. Fine, good for him. I'm not going to hold it against him. I'm certainly not going to hold it against Lovey or Tim Kelly. Pep is interesting. Pep, I'm sure, had some other offers and ended up here. He presumably was going to get to work with Deshaun. Maybe that was the lure. Maybe they didn't tell him, because I wouldn't doubt that at all with the way things are going in Texans land right now. But it's not a good look. It's a very questionable staff. Lovey hasn't been in the NFL for some time. He's been the head coach of Illinois. Illinois ran a lot of his concepts, which, again, worked okay in college. He didn't have a great record in Illinois, but they're not going to fly in the modern NFL. Defense has moved on from the classic Tampa 2, so we were having that discussion prior to the show. Is Lovey going to run Tampa 2? And you said, not with our personnel. And I said, no, but is he going to stick with it? Like, that's the question. Or is he going to try and adapt and maybe do a little bit of a, Vic Fangio impression? And can he? He's no spring chicken either. So it's going to be really interesting to see if there is any meshing here, or if it's all just threshing, if it's all just churn and destruction. And I wouldn't bet on anything, because the stuff, we're hearing out of Houston is bewildering, quite frankly. They're not operating as other teams in the NFL normally do. So I can't really make any predictions about it. I hope the best for those guys. Maybe they get a Cinderella season out of it, but I really doubt it.
Oh, this entire franchise is... I hope one day there's a documentary made about it, because it is flabbergasting. Like, everything going on in that building is flabbergasting right now. Like, it's...
You know what it's going to be like?
It's awe-inspiring.
It's going to be like the Behind the Music special when the band starts to come apart.
It's already apart. I mean, this is like,
No, but you know what I'm talking about, right? They get to that point.
if this was Fleetwood Mac, we'd have a Grammy-winning album out next week. That's how bad it is.
Oh, well played, Mr. Coleman. Well played. I think we should talk about kneecaps.
And specifically how delicious and nutritious they are?
Yes, very high calcium content. No, let's move on to the Lions, talk about new head coach Dan Campbell, most recently the assistant head coach / tight ends coach for the Saints. New offensive coordinator for the Lions, Anthony Lynn, most recently head coach of the Chargers. And the defensive coordinator, who I might be the most excited about on that staff, Aaron Glenn, secondary coach for the Saints, most recently a 15-year NFL player who I cough scouted. Ouch. Anyways, but has a very good track record as a defensive coach in the NFL and a lot of experience on this staff. How does this staff land with you outside of all the kneecap stuff, which was really, we're talking about Dan Campbell's comments at his opening press conference as head coach of the Lions. He talked about the mentality of his team and mentioned, you can look it up, just go Google it. He talked about biting kneecaps, both on the way down and on the way back up. But we're not going to focus on that because that's more fluff than substance. How did this very well tenured staff that's now in charge in Detroit land with you?
I'm very excited about the Aaron Glenn nod for DC because he's a really good secondary coach. Again, he played forever. So I'm very curious to see what he can do with Jeff Okudah, who, I mean, let's be honest, kind of started out a little bit rough.
Ding.
Started out a little bit rough as a rookie, but he's immensely talented. And I think if there's one guy that you can bring in and say, like, all right, Jeff, like, this guy's going to fix you, I think it's Aaron Glenn. I think he's really one of the best DB coaches in the whole country at any level. And I'm very excited about that. And also, Amani Oruwariye, I think, is going to benefit from him as well. Also, another talented young corner they have. So all of the young Lions DBs, I think, are going to benefit from this. Anthony Lynn, I think he's a good offensive coach. He's had success in multiple places in terms of game planning, he's a Greg Roman disciple, so I think he gets very creative with the run game. The problem with him with the Chargers was not in terms of like actually coaching offense. It was management of the clock. It was management of timeouts. It was having your shit together on special teams. Like, it was a very discombobulated operation. But offensively, like, in terms of the stuff that has nothing to do with managing a game, I think Anthony Lynn's a pretty good coach. And he's had multiple different influences in terms of coaches he's worked under. I think Greg Roman is probably the one that I'm most fascinated by, in particular, like how Greg Roman designs a run game. I think Anthony Lynn, who's a former running back himself, I think can take a lot of influence from Greg Roman to design some really cool stuff for DeAndre Swift. Curious to see if he does that. But overall, like, I like Anthony Lynn as a coach. I don't like him as a head coach. But as an OC, yeah, that's a pretty solid pick.
Yeah, and Lions fans, I mean, being a team in the division that I follow, Lions fans are pretty damn excited about Dan Campbell. A lot of people jumped on the kneecap comments and said, oh boy, meathead football coach. Dan Campbell's a lot more than that. He's got a history with the Lions. He's got a good coaching pedigree coming from the Saints, and he's more than just the kneecap comment. And most importantly right now, the wave he's riding with Detroit fans is he is the anti-Matt Patricia. Mm-hmm. Matt Patricia was dour and sour, came from that I'm not telling you shit camp from New England, right? Started off extremely rough with the press in his first year in Detroit. Warmed up a little bit. We got to see him at the Senior Bowl last year. Seemed like a fairly affable guy up close. Seemed like he had softened around the edges a little bit. But Detroit fans are really... They had to watch a bad football team, and they had to have a sort of say-nothing head coach. And that just really didn't sit well with them. Obviously, the losing's no fun, but on top of that, not having any personality. So the fact that Dan Campbell is the anti-Matt Patricia, that he's full of personality and vigor and, excitement for what he's going to bring to the team, Detroit fans are generally pretty supportive of Dan Campbell right now. And I think that's going to work for him. And there's some things on both sides of the ball here. Look, they've got Jared Goff as their starter. They seem to be pretty excited about that. As a Bears fan, I'm okay excited about that. He's not most likely going to be throwing to Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay is going to move on in free agency. That makes me happy. So it doesn't scare me very much. But Aaron Glenn, you mentioned Jeff Okudah, but he's also got Romeo Okwara, who ended up with 10 sacks last year for the Lions, right? 5-year player out of Notre Dame. One of the quieter 10-sack seasons that we've seen in a while. There's some pieces to work with. Now, there's also a bunch of work to do rebuilding the rest of the talent on the defensive side of the ball, because Matt Patricia and his staff were drafting for their system and it never worked. They were never really able to sort of connect the cables and have their drafting match their system and show results on the field. They just kind of got worse and worse. So he's not starting with a fully stocked cupboard. This is not, the coaching staff walking into the LA Chargers and going, oh, damn, look at all these players we have on the defensive side of the ball. There's still a lot of work to do on the entire roster, but specifically on the defensive side. But I think Aaron Glenn is going to get a lot out of guys like Jeff Okudah, and I'm really interested to see how he deploys guys like Romeo Okwara, who, again, had a very successful season for a very bad team, so a lot of fans don't know his name.
And, I mean, there's some other players there that I think have been really good in the past that just, for whatever reason last year, either regressed or just didn't meet expectations. I mean, Trey Flowers, Deshaun Hand has had some success in the past, particularly in 2018 and 2019. Like, he was pretty good rotational pass rusher for them. Jamie Collins, I think, was better in New England than he was in Detroit. Like, even though, weirdly enough, he played under Matt Patricia in New England and was better under Patricia in New England. Makes you wonder, like, how much of that was Belichick and Flores compared to Patricia. But again, Jamie Collins still really talented, so I'm very curious to see how they use him. I think Deron Harmon's going to be there next year. I don't know if he's a free agent or not. I can't remember. But, he's had some really, particularly in New England, I think he's had some really good moments. Tracy Walker's a safety I like. Like, there's, I think Justin Coleman's still there too as their nickel. Like, there's guys there. Desmond Trufant too is another one. There's a lot of dudes on this team, and their defense should not have been as bad as it was. So, again, I think defensively more than offensively, like, they're walking into some talent there. The question is, can they get it to play up to their talent level? I'm very curious to see how long it takes this team to turn around. A lot of that probably depends on who they get back in free agency. Like, can they convince Kenny Golladay to stay? Easier said than done. Do they try to retain Marvin Jones? Actually, now that I think about it, their top 4 receivers are all free agents because Sanu and Amendola are free agents as well.
Yeah, the only guy they've got left in the receiving core, and this is a sort of underappreciated fact, is Quintez Cephas, who is a rookie out of Wisconsin. Good player, but he literally has, it's just him. It's the Will Smith gif, right, of the empty living room. It's like him walking into the wide receivers room like, guys, where'd you go?
Yeah.
One of the players for a receiving option that's pretty interesting for them is Hunter Bryant, who was the big, fast tight end out of Washington last year. I thought a little overrated in the draft, but they ended up getting him way down. What was he? I think did he go UDFA or did he?
He was a UDFA. I think it was because of injuries.
Yeah, it was. But like, if he's had his year to rehab and he and Hawkinson playing in the same formations, like, again, Dan Campbell, a tight ends coach, if anybody's going to say, hey, let's get your career started, kid, that would be a pretty interesting way to start. But yeah, if you're betting on the Lions to draft wide receivers this year, bet the over. They're going to need some.
Especially if they don't get Golladay back, which, I mean, if I'm Kenny Golladay, And I have.
I think there's almost zero chance that Kenny Galladay
There's
is a Lion.
so many better situations for him to go to.
Yeah, he's looking at the quarterback situation. He's looking at, is this team ready to contend? And I don't think anybody in their right mind right now is looking at the Lions, no matter how shiny they think Dan Campbell is, and saying, "Oh yeah, this is a championship caliber roster." It's just not. If I'm Kenny Galladay, people are going to offer me bags of cash to go places probably that have a quarterback and have a decent shot at getting to the playoffs with a shot to win some games. I'm going there. Like, I'm not hanging out for the Lions.
Just when you look at teams that have the most cap space going into free agency, I mean, the Jaguars got $77 million, and they're going to get Trevor Lawrence. I would definitely go to I mean, again, no income tax, so you kind of secure the bag. You get to play with a good quarterback. The Colts have a ton of money. Kind of depends on if you believe in Carson Wentz, but even then, again, the cap space is not a problem for them. They have $68 million, at least before the Wentz deal. I don't know how much of that they're eating, but it's not that much. The Jets have $67 million, so if you're a big believer in Zach Wilson, I think that can work out as a really good pairing with Denzel Mims and Jamison Crowder.
That would be a hell of a thing.
The Bengals got $38 million, so if he likes Joe Burrow, who's presumably going to be healthy for week 1, pair him up with T. Higgins, and you got the Twin Towers there, and A.J. Green's still there, so really the triplets. Hell, that would be a hell of a receiving core. The Dolphins.
Dolphins have a ton of money, and they need an alpha. The Ravens need an alpha. There's just so many people that need his skill set. We talked about it on this podcast over and over and over again this year. Kenny Galladay was the difference maker. He was that true alpha. When he was on the field, the Lions played very, very differently. Mm-hmm. And, his best buddy, Matt Stafford, walks, and there's all these other situations. They all need an alpha, and he clearly fits that bill. Like, he is easily that number one wide receiver that can drive your offense. He's going to get blown away with the bag, low cap or not. Somebody's going to the bank, and they're going to grab him.
I'm looking at the Jags depth chart because I think, again, just because they can outbid literally everybody. Okay, DJ Chark, Kenny Galladay.
Yeah, but I actually like their receiving core, so I may not be the best one to take that argument on because I think
I don't hate it either.
They have a lot of diversity. Yeah,
I don't hate it either. But if you can go 4 deep, Kenny Galladay, DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault, Colin Johnson, are you kidding me?
No, it's very talented. I just think they might need to spend a bunch of that money in other places, and wide receiver is one of the places they're probably best stacked right now on their roster. So that would be the only reason I would think maybe they wouldn't. But if I'm Kenny Galladay and the Jaguars throw a bag at me and you get to say, hey, like you said, no income tax, and I get to play with Trevor Lawrence, who looks like he's going to be pretty darn good, and I've got a great supporting cast, I'm going to catch doubles because I'm the alpha, but all these other guys are able to take targets. That's a fun place to be.
They hired Brian Schottenheimer for a reason. That's to throw the damn ball because that's all Brian Schottenheimer does. That would be a hell of a fit. It's like not necessary, as you said, but it would just be fun, like for entertainment's sake.
I love the Jets fit. If they go out, and I really don't think they're going to just set sail with Sam Darnold. I just think there's so much new and so much hope that they are going to take, again, you hope that you're not picking that high ever again. So, you're at number 2, you stay put, you take the guy you want out of the next 2 or 3 quarterbacks, however you have them ranked, you bring him in, and you go get him targets. And what better to say, hey, we got you Kenny Galladay. Denzel Mims is looking good. We got Jamison Crowder, who is well suited for that number 3 role. And then you've got, your associated cast of characters. You pick up a tight end, and off to the races. Like, you could really start building something pretty quickly there. We got an OC from an established passing attack. Like, you're going to get your shots here. It could be pretty compelling.
Why don't we go to kind of the 3, I don't even want to call them awards, but just kind of our consensus pick for best staff, staff we are most excited about and staff with the biggest question mark. You and I think we're kind of on the same page for all three of these. Best staff, Jets.
Yep.
Staff we're most excited about, Chargers.
Yep.
Biggest question mark, which is really our way of saying, like, oh my God, what the hell are they doing? Texans.
Yeah, with an honorable mention to the Jags, but I think the Jags have so much more going for them that, again, they're not even in the same neighborhood. It's got to be Texans for, like, WTF, like, oh, this can't end well. So, no, Jets, Chargers, and Texans for those three categories. And then we wanted to talk about some folks that didn't get a seat. Who are the big names? We've mentioned most of them. Eric Bieniemy, the OC for the Chiefs, again, no chair at the end of the music. That is highly frustrating to a lot of players and coaches who've worked with him and say very similar things about him that folks said about Robert Saleh, right? Not just that he's a great, schemer, strategist, play caller, that he is a leader of men and that people want to play for him. And that is a necessary quality in a head coach. And lots of players that currently play for him or have played for him in the past have come out and said, this is your guy. This is the guy you want leading your football team. He is that guy. He's built for this job. And he's been through a couple of cycles with a very high profile here and hasn't had a gig. And I hear things like, he doesn't interview well. And I'm like, I think he doesn't interview well is the NFL's version of, I'm just not sure you'd fit here when you go and apply for a job and they don't really have any like real feedback about your resume or your interview, but there's something that they don't like that they don't want to say. They just go, I don't think you'd fit here. That's the NFL's version of, he doesn't interview well. I can't believe that a guy like Eric Bieniemy doesn't interview well, because if you listen to him in press conferences, which is basically an interview by the press,
he owns the room.
He's extremely impressive. Like, I have so many doubts that a guy like that goes in the room and wilts under pressure and just steps on his tongue in front of you. Like, it's just not happening.
Yeah.
You don't want him for another reason, but that ain't it. So Eric Bieniemy is sort of the most notable, didn't get a seat. And then Brian Daboll, we talked about, very high profile season, has done amazing work with the Bills offense and specifically with Josh Allen. And look, if you are a quarterback whisperer in the modern NFL, you're getting some looks because it is the most important position in the NFL. It drives offenses. It wins games. And what he did with a guy that me and many other analysts said, this is one of, if not the riskiest prospects we've seen in years. And what Josh Allen has accomplished, through his own efforts, but obviously through the efforts of guys like Brian Daboll, is staggering. It's historic. Nobody's ever made the progress that Josh Allen has made in that short of a time. Nobody. He is one of one.
Yeah. And
so Brian Daboll not getting a shot, especially with the Chargers, where a lot of people thought he was a fit, but not getting a shot overall, is a little surprising to me. I would have loved to see him in Jacksonville, right? Him with Trevor Lawrence, and that roster and all that cap space, hell yes. Yeah. That'd be super fun. So, little surprising, but, honestly, a tremendous gift for both Kansas City and the Bills that they get to roll those guys back. There is no way that either one of those franchises thought, oh, yeah, we'll have Eric in that seat next year. Oh, Brian will be back. No, they didn't think that. They get that, and it's a real gift. It's a boon to those fan bases. But guys you will most likely see in the coaching carousel next year. And the last one's the one you added, Todd Bowles, the DC for the Bucs. Why don't you talk about that for a minute?
So I think this kind of caught steam, well after the hiring cycle was over. It was like, man, nobody really considered Todd Bowles at all. He was very low down on the list of buzz and interview requests and stuff like that. It kind of seemed like a lot of other coaches, even defensive coaches, were getting looks before Todd Bowles. And maybe it was because people still remember what happened with the Jets, but let's be real, that wasn't all his fault. In fact, I'd say a lot of it was not his fault. But I also think that round 2 for him as head coach, and I do believe he will be a head coach again, will be more successful because of what he learned the first time around with the Jets. What we know is this dude can really call a defense. He's extremely adaptable. He molds his game plans and the overall structure of his defense to the strengths of his personnel. Very flexible coach. Players love him. I mean, they will fight to the death for this man. Nobody's ever said a bad word about Todd Bowles as a human being. I think he had some bad luck as the Jets head coach, and I don't know if he was experienced enough to kind of deal with some of the hands he was dealt there. Because let's be real, he was dealt some pretty bad hands. But I do think that, after seeing his defense dominate the Chiefs, not just in the Super Bowl, but in the second half of their regular season matchup back in Week 12, where they almost came back and beat him the first time. Like, this is a head coach that knows how to adapt to a record-setting offense on the fly and completely shit all over them. He's a brilliant defensive mind. And I do not believe that he's going to be a DC for more than one more season. I think after next year, he's going to get a job solely because a lot of the coaches were hired before the Super Bowl happened, and all the jobs were taken. If the coach hiring cycle took place after the Super Bowl, he would have been one of the first guys taken, guarantee it, because of the job he did in the playoffs. And I think that's going to carry over to next year. He's going to be one of the, if not the hottest name on the market, probably all year long. And really the key question is, where is he going to go in 2022? You look at coaches on the hot seat right now, it's tough to really predict, who's going to get fired. But I would not be surprised if, say, Mike Zimmer decides to retire. He's an easy one to slide in and take over from day one in Minnesota. He can work with the same personnel. I mean, they run a lot of the same stuff, and it would be a perfect fit. I think he would be really, really good in Minnesota. If Nagy only lasts one more year, I think he'd be great in Chicago. It's tough to say if he really would want the Dallas job if McCarthy only lasts one more year. I don't know if Dallas is really his speed, but I think they would at least give him a look. This guy is going to have interest from a lot of teams, and I can't see him being a coordinator for more than one more year.
I'll throw an interesting one out there, and I agree with everything you said about Todd Bowles. I think his second act is going to be greater than his first act. We know that he is a tremendous coach. The Super Bowl really cemented that. You touched on one thing that I want to get into, which is I really think the NFL needs to revamp the coach hiring cycle, because right now it's just not fair. And it doesn't give an equitable chance for guys like Todd Bowles with the rules they have in place. They tried to make the little window where you could get a snapshot interview with the coach earlier on. It's just not enough. They need to basically say, look, when the season's over, we'll start the carousel. And look, it's going to move just as fast as it ever does. And I know teams really value that extra time that they can get, sometimes, up to 3 weeks for that staff to get in place and really start to dig into the draft prep. But it's just not fair to coaches that are on very successful teams right now. And Bieniemy and Bowles are two of them. Dable joined that group this year. But I think Todd Bowles, like you said, brilliant coach, learned a lot the first time. He's learned a lot under Arians as well. The things he's learned from Bruce Arians in Tampa, and how he built a staff and what he values and how much he empowers his coordinators and coaches to really take the reins there, all things that Bowles is going to take with him to his next stop. And I'm just going to float one out there as a sort of what if that would be really interesting. So living in the Pacific Northwest, there's been a little foam, there's been a little churn about Russell Wilson's not happy. And some people have said, it's a non-story because Russ isn't going anywhere. Well, Russ isn't going anywhere because of his dead cap charge, but that doesn't mean it's a non-story. It means this is bubbling up on purpose, and it's being most likely bubbled up by Wilson. So why is he not happy? And you can see some reasons potentially why he wouldn't be. But let's just say at the end of next season becomes untenable, and Russ says, that's it, not doing it anymore. you got to move me. At that point, he's going to be 34. His dead cap charge will be down to not horrendous. It'll still be large. And Russell says, that's it. I'm out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And Pete Carroll is, I believe, the oldest head coach. Second oldest head coach?
No,
Second oldest head coach.
He's the oldest,
in the
I
NFL.
think.
Yeah. So Cornell, I think, was older. But, yeah, I think he's the oldest head coach, which a lot of people, he's a very vibrant guy, a lot of energy, always has had that, looks great, keeps himself in shape. But he is literally the oldest head coach in the NFL. And if Russell Wilson, who has been holding together the entire Seattle program, despite some, very questionable rosters for a long time, says, that's it, bag it, I'm out. I could see Pete saying, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't want to go through a whole rebuild. I'm 70, whatever I am. Forget it. I could equally see him saying, as Pete Carroll might, like, I'm invigorated. I want a challenge. Let's do this. But I could also see him saying, hey, I've had my run. It was very successful. I like it. I'm gonna step back now. And Bulls coming to the Seahawks would be pretty darn interesting. I don't think he'd be the leading candidate, but I think that would be really interesting with all the things we've said about Todd Bowles and what he's learned at the various stops and the coaching jobs and positions, people he's coached under. I like the Minnesota slide in with Zimmer retiring, because people have made the point that just with the roster construction and the salary cap with the Vikings, it's this year or else. If they don't make a run this year, they're stripping it down, and I really don't think Zimmer's in for a strip down. I think he's absolutely going to walk if the Vikings don't succeed this year. Maybe even if they do, right? Maybe even if they go on and have a good run in the playoffs, he goes, hey, that was my thing. But Bulls would be a very natural fit there. I'm just saying a wild card choice. If Russell Wilson shoots his way out of Seattle after next season and Pete says, I don't want any part of that, I would put Bulls in the conversation. I would put Bieniemy in the conversation as well. But just a sort of outside dark horse candidate for where he might end up.
Well, I'll tell you what, if Eric Bieniemy makes himself available for Seattle, Russ ain't going anywhere. Because he'd be like, nah, I'm gonna work with that guy. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, if Russ stays, I think Pete stays. It's like a handcuff in fantasy, right? If Russell's here, Pete's going to keep riding him.
If Russ says him or me, they're going to choose Russ.
Yep. No, I get it. I'm not so sure about that. We can get into that on another podcast, but again, I don't think that dynamic is that clear, mostly because of the ownership situation.
Mm.
But that's until the ownership situation gets settled. If they had new owners and Russ said me or him, the new owners would go with the quarterback, I think, almost certainly. But the way the ownership situation is right now, I don't think that's a guarantee. I think that's more of a toss-up, especially with him being, going on 34 and tremendously expensive. That might not be the thing. They might say, well, we'll ship you off. We'll take the assets, but we're going to rebuild with our coach GM combination, which they've leaned very heavily on since Paul Allen's death. So, just one of those things. Fascinating, but hope you guys all enjoyed this. It was something we said we were going to do. It was fun for us. It's a great way for us to sort of set our feet into the next league year and really start thinking about how these teams stack up, what they might do in the draft, what their needs are. It's just a fascinating start to our sort of off-season preview that'll happen after the draft. It really does start with coaching staffs or start at the top. So this was fun for us to do. Certainly let us know in the comments on YouTube's and where you get your podcast, whether or not this was something you like, you want more of, you want less of, because we're always evolving, always changing, trying to learn lessons from our coaching/podcasting failures. So let us know, but we were happy to do it, and you guys sounded like you wanted it. So we will see you pretty soon. We're going to do our Bootleg All-Pro edition next, and then really move heavily into the draft season. We're already doing plenty of scouting, but that's what we've got going on. Brett, you said you've got an episode coming out. Is that your next one, or you got one you want to plug?
I haven't really determined the order. I know I am going to do Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah as one of my first 2 draft episodes. I might do one on the folly of quarterback evaluation, because the story about going 0 for 22 between 2009 and 2016 in the first round is amazing to me. And I know people bring up Andrew Luck worked out. Stafford, Luck, and Newton are literally the only 3 first-round quarterbacks that worked out in that entire period. So 3 out of 22. So I think I might do an episode on how hard it is to get quarterback right and why the vast majority of them don't work out. That'll be a fun episode. A little bit painful emotionally, but it would be fun. I'm definitely going to do Rashad Bateman. So again, I'm trying to work out the order that I'm doing these in, but all of those topics will be coming sooner rather than later.
Oh, yeah, and we should preview that we've got a fairly decent guest list building up for the Bootleg Football Podcast. Many of those folks are going to drop in during draft season, trying to grab people with different specialties. We mentioned several of them in this episode alone, but folks that focus on quarterback, folks that focus on offensive line play or wide receiver, or, maybe they play defense or coach defense. Lots of folks, or maybe they're just a tremendous draft analyst. We've got a lot of folks lined up over the next couple of months. We're starting to line up dates, trying to get slotted into their calendars. So keep your eyes peeled to social media for sure. We'll certainly be promoting the heck out of those things once we land them and the ink is dry and they say that they're coming on and we've got a date for it. But should be a very fun run up to the draft. Both Brett and I, love the draft, just enjoy it personally, but getting to chop it up with other folks that do it as a job or have even more experience than we do is always fun. So we've got a bunch of that queued up. So keep it tuned in, and we will see you very soon.
Later.